Welcome to a Christmas Eve edition of The Sweat. Let's get right into it. We're going to start with our NFL panel, DraftKings contributors Piers Dietrich, Matt Meiselman, and RotoWire's Alan Seslowski. So guys, NFL high or low time. Are these week 16 odds and lines too high or are they too low? So let's start with the AFC East showdown. Now, early weather reports show a much nicer forecast than their last matchup. Can we see two of the league's top defenses step up again, or will the offenses get going? And the 43.5 game total between Bills and Pats is like maybe even a little bit low here, Piers.
Too high? No, it's definitely too high. Let's give some respect to these defenses. I understand that the Patriots allowed 27 points last week, but if you look closely, 7 came on a block punt. Another 7 was a 67-yard touchdown run at the end of the game. The Patriots did give up a solid drive in the first quarter, but the rest of the game, the Patriots defense did what the Patriots defense typically does, played pretty well. I know Buffalo is out without Tre'Davious White, but New England isn't really a team that's set up to take advantage of that. New England has a good passing attack, but they're not really an elite passing attack that's going to be able to exploit this. So otherwise, I mean, the Buffalo defense is going to be fine. And who knows what the weather's going to be like. I'm sure it won't be that great. So give me the under.
Matt, do you want to take the under 43.5?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. So we don't have Tre'Davious White, but we also potentially don't have Cole Beasley, who I'm pretty sure is just about confirmed out for this game, which I think does hurt the Bills offense. I think there are a lot of variables that are hard to judge with this game, though. Like, these teams just played each other in very different conditions. I personally have no idea what kind of game plans we'll see. We obviously saw Bill Belichick do something very unusual in the first meeting, basically just abandoning the pass offense. Maybe we see something different where he goes the entire opposite route because the Bills may be expecting this. Like, I just think there's a lot of ways this game could go. But overall, this isn't going to be good weather. Like, it certainly won't be what it was last time, but this is still December in New England, probably see temperatures in the 30s, a little bit of wind. It's still outdoors. Like, it's still not great for passing. And there are some offensive injuries. Maybe Damian Harris is out for the Patriots still too. But ultimately, like, I'm leaning under without much confidence because I think coaching could dictate a lot here, and I just don't know what these teams are going to do.
Alan, are you leaning under 43.5?
Smart bettors like Pierce and Matt, they realize that you take the under on the second time that divisional opponents face each other, but I'm a little more reckless. You can throw that 14-10 Patriots game versus the Bills in week 13 right out the door because of the weather. Checking the weather report for Thursday is sometimes like a foolish thing to do, but right now it says the low 40s, which is not really a factor. The case for the under, we can almost set our clocks to Bill Belichick neutralizing Buffalo's best weapon, which is probably Stephon Diggs, but that still leaves Gabriel Davis, who has 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games, Dawson Knox, who's been in sync with Josh Allen all season long, and Devin Singletary has now emerged as the primary running back. Buffalo may be an outdoor team, but they operate like a dome team. They can score points with a high-flying offense. I'm taking the over here.
All right, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are on the COVID list right now for the Chiefs, but they're still favored by 7.5 over the Steelers. Like, is that spread too high with the Chiefs' top receivers possibly out, Matt?
So it depends if they actually play. This is a little bit of like the way that NBA betting tends to work, where lines are priced in a spot without knowing either way. And it's kind of just like a midpoint. So to me, the 7.5 is set for the uncertainty of Hill and Kelce. And I think if they play, we see the spread come up. And in that case, yeah, it's too low because those guys are in. But if they don't play, 7.5 is too high. I just don't think this Chiefs offense is going to be very good. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has had an inconsistent year. I think he's still a good quarterback for sure, but you basically just take away all of his weapons in that scenario. And I think we will see the spread drop below a touchdown in that case. So if those guys are out, 7.5 is way too high. I think the line comes in around 5 or 6 in that case.
Alan, what do you think?
I think the opening line for this was around 10, but for obvious reasons, nobody got their money down on that one. It dropped to 7.5 for all the reasons Matt just talked about. Mike Tomlin's a really good coach, and I expect the Steelers to show up. Mahomes had his breakout game of sorts last week with that 403, but Mahomes is, last year was over 8 yards per attempt. This year he's 7.3. Still doesn't look right to me. That could be a function of the umbrella defenses that we've seen teams play this year, but a non-quarterback skill player rarely moves the line more than a point. But if both Kelce and Hill don't suit up, that could be the Jenga piece that topples this whole thing. I'm taking the points in Pittsburgh.
All right, Pierce, what are you doing here?
It was definitely too high at 10, and it's still too high for me because it's not just Kelsey and Tyreek Hill that are out. There's two starting offensive linemen that are not going to play. And we know Kansas City has had offensive line issues all season. They seem to have shored that up. But now if you're going to have two starters out in the offensive line, that's going to cause problems. But even worse, they've got four starting defensive players that are on the COVID list. And we know that the strength of that team has not necessarily been the offense or Hill or Kelsey. It's been that defense has absolutely been shutting teams down for the last 2 months. If they're going to be without four starters, two offensive linemen, and then possibly either or Kelsey or Hill, it's going to be pretty hard for them to, beat a gritty, gutsy Pittsburgh team that I think Kansas City would win, but that's just too many points with that many players out.
All right, Eagles coming off a Tuesday night win against Washington. They're 10-point favorites at home against a Giants team who beat them 13-7 their last matchup. Is 10 points too many for a Philly team that's short on rest, Alan?
The Mike Glennon Giants were barely an NFL team, and now they're turning it over to Jake Fromm for his first ever NFL start. And who knows? He could be the next Gardner Minshew, but I'm not going to project that. The Eagles do look like a borderline playoff team at best, though, and they always seem to struggle against the Giants, and they're coming off that extra short week. I'm taking the 10.
Pierce, how you feel about this?
Yeah, this line is too high. If Philadelphia wasn't a 10-point favorite against a Washington team that was playing virtually nobodies they were picking up off the street, then why are they 10 points this week? It doesn't make any sense. And Philadelphia has got 2 games to close out the season with Washington. I really think that Philadelphia is focusing a lot of their attention on Washington. They could be overlooking the Giants to some extent. The Giants have been decent at covering games. What this really feels like is last week when the Dolphins were favored by 10 points against the Jets. Yeah, the Jets are terrible, but under no circumstances should the Dolphins be 10-point favorites. And I think it's the same thing with the Eagles. Are the Eagles a team that should ever be favored by 10 points? They're not that good. I know that the Giants have issues that they're going to deal with, but the run game hasn't been terrible. I think they can hang into this game. And I also think the Philadelphia is overlooking and looking towards the next big game against Washington. So this line's too high.
Matt, too high for you?
So I'm going to go against these guys, actually, because I just really don't think the Giants are very good. And I think the difference between this game and the last game is that the Giants defense started the season somewhat respectable, and they just have not really been close to that recently, and especially against the run, where that's the Eagles' focus. Like, even when it's Jalen Hurts, he's running the ball too. So I think he should be able to expose a pretty bad Giants defense. I think Jake Fromm is probably going to have some problems. And yeah, I'm in New Jersey right now, so I hope none of these Giants fans are too close to me listening to me say this, but I think the Eagles probably win this game by 2 touchdowns or more.
And we'll be giving out your address in no, I'm just kidding. All right. Rams on the road, favored by 2.5 points against Minnesota. Vikings are in that 7th seed as of right now, but with the Rams fighting for the division, is the 2.5 point spread a little low, Pierce?
It feels like a trap, but I will say that it is too low. And the reason why it's a trap is you just don't know which Vikings team is going to show up. More specifically, you don't know which Kirk Cousins is going to show up. The bad Kirk Cousins showed up against the Bears, but then a couple weeks ago against the Green Bay, you like that guy, and he exploded against Green Bay. So do we get good Kirk Cousins? If we do, then it's too high. But I'm going to lean towards an average to bad Kirk Cousins playing. And even if you set that aside, the Rams look good. We know that the Rams had some issues for a couple of weeks with their offensive line, and Matthew Stafford was making some mistakes. They seem to have fixed that. They did struggle the other night during the first half, couldn't convert on 3rd and long. Well, the best way to deal with 3rd and long is be better on 1st and 2nd down. And they were in the second half. They scored 17 points in the second half as opposed to 3 in the first half. The Rams are just fine. Not a lot of question marks there. So I'll trust the Rams and that this line is too low.
Matt, are you trusting the Rams in this spot?
Kind of. I think to Pierce's point, yeah, we never really know what we're going to get from the Vikings. I think more often than not, the Vikings are able to play well enough to keep this game close. And I just wanted to double check this line because with the -2.5 with the Rams, you do have to lay -125. This line is like pretty much 3 because you're getting +105 on the +2.5 on the Vikings side. So with those numbers, like 2.5 seemed like the right line to me, but with plus money on it from the Vikings, like that's probably where I'm leaning. I do think the Vikings are an average-ish, maybe slightly above average team. They're just wildly inconsistent, like Pierce said. So my gut feeling here is to take the points. The Rams are on a short week too. We mentioned it with the Eagles, but the Rams also they played the Tuesday game, so they don't have a lot of time to prepare for this either. They're going into Minnesota. I think it sets up well for the Vikings to cover. I don't know if they win, but I think this line might actually be a little too high.
Alan, what do you think?
Matt, by the way, Jesse almost doxed you before. You got to be count your blessings there. Yeah. The Vikings usually make it a game no matter who they're playing. They seem to play the best teams pretty competitively and wilt to the average teams. We just talked about it, about the short week for the Rams. And I like it better when it was 3, but the Vikings are a strong money line underdog this week because I could easily see them winning the game. I'll take the 2.5 points. And, the 2.5, 3, it doesn't seem like the traditional 3-point home field advantage really it matters anymore with people using drunk analytics to go for 2, not to go for 2. So again, I just like the Vikings to win this game outright.
All right, good stuff, guys. Segment 1 in the books. There will be plenty more NFL talk to come in this show, but next we're taking a look in the NBA. The Sweat will be right back. We are back on the Sweat with our NBA panel, DraftKings contributor Nick Fryer and Gary Thorne with RotoWire's Nick Whalen. Fellas, NBA building blocks time. So favorite DFS plays at the following positions for the 11-game NBA slate coming our way this evening. So who are you going to build around at guard, Nick F?
I'm going to go with Seth Curry tonight at 7K going up against the Hawks. The Hawks are a lot of teams are running ragged right now, but the Hawks, especially losing Trae Young and Clint Capella, and now they're on the second leg of a back-to-back. They just got smoked by the Magic last night, and they were the favorite in that game too. And I know Tyrese Maxey is a good option too. He's off the injury report. He's at 6.7K, a little bit cheaper than Seth Curry, but the difference is that Seth Curry's been around, whereas Tyrese Maxey's been out. And Seth Curry's coming off consecutive 40-plus DK fantasy point performances. The Hawks have given up the ninth most DK fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. And again, they're shorthanded, so this is a big matchup for him tonight.
Gary, and who do you want to build around at guard?
I'm just going to keep going back to Jalen Brunson. Things just keep getting worse in Dallas. This is someone who already, when it's just Luka who's out, I always kind of felt like Brunson was basically just Western Conference Fred VanVleet. He just plays all the time and does a little bit of everything, and he tends to bring back value. Well, he's finally priced like a Fred VanVleet type. He's $8,500 tonight, but it took literally every member of the Dallas Mavericks backcourt essentially not being available. There is no Trey Burke. There is no Tim Hardaway Jr. There should just be so many shots available to Brunson tonight. And yes, Kristaps Porzingis might play in this game. He's questionable. That really doesn't affect my viewpoint of Brunson here. If anything, if KP plays, that might be better for Brunson just because it might keep this game a little bit more competitive against the Milwaukee Bucks. But in his last 3 games without Luka, Brunson has averaged 39 minutes, and he leads the NBA in that span of time with 20.7 potential assists per game. That's not even including the points he's scoring and the rebounds he's grabbing and the steals he's racking up. Again, he just touches every category. And if he's going to play 40 minutes, it's really hard to ignore this guy.
Nick W., who you going with at guard?
I wish I had dug up some potential assist stats. That's a good note on Jalen Brunson, but I'm going to keep going back to a guy who I feel like I'm talking about 3 times a week on the show, and that's DeJounte Murray. And his price is now, up over 10,000. He's at 10,300 tonight, going up against the Lakers, coming off of a 72 DraftKings point game in his last outing. He's pretty much comfortably topping 50 DraftKings points every single night this season. And you look at this matchup, Lakers remain a mess. They've lost 3 straight. They're, guys are in and out every single night. I think the one-on-one positional matchup against Russell Westbrook is super appealing for a guy like Murray, who can rack up a lot of steals against like the most turnover-prone player in the entire league. Not surprising to find that the Lakers are dead last in fantasy points allowed to the position. So that makes sense. I think DeJounte Murray, well worth paying up for at 10,300. If you want to save a little bit of money, I also like LaMelo Ball at Denver tonight. Nuggets are on the second leg of a back-to-back. He's at 9,900. And then assuming he plays on the second half of a back-to-back, I think he will. On the other side of that Jalen Brunson matchup, Drew Holiday at 8,300, I think is a really good price for a guy who is essentially their co-number 1 option when Giannis is out of the lineup. He's been fantastic over his last 4 or 5 games.
All right, who's a forward worth building your lineup around, Garion?
So I think Brandon Ingram has just been one of the best players in the Western Conference since the beginning of December, and he's really taken on more of a playmaking role for this team. And while, it's sort of, we've reached this weird place where generally speaking, you want to see like other quote unquote co-stars out because that increases usage rate. With some of these teams, you almost want some of these guys in there just because these scripts can get ridiculous, but no Jonas Valanciunas tonight for the Pelicans. So you'd have to assume that Ingram is looking at over 20 field goal attempts in this game, a usage rate well above 30%. He's averaging 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in the 9 games he's played so far in the month of December. 7 of those 9 games, he's eclipsed 40 DraftKings points. He's gone over 49 DraftKings points in 5 of those games. So his ceiling is super high going up against an Orlando Magic team that really just doesn't look like an NBA squad. I know they won last night, but their rotation right now is just some incredible stuff. They're the second worst defensive team in the Eastern Conference by defensive rating for the season. So this just seems like a really good matchup for a player who's probably going to have like a 35% usage rate tonight.
Nick W., hit me with a forward worth building your lineup around.
Well, I have Brandon Ingram as well. And I think it helps his case that like 2 minutes ago, Nickeil Alexander-Walker entered COVID protocols. So, that's yet another piece for the Pelicans. 35% usage rate might be low for Brandon Ingram tonight. I think we could see a situation where he's, easily eclipsing 20, 25 shot attempts just by default. So he's going to be a really popular play. You look at his last 10 games, 27 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, 51% shooting over that 10-game span. It felt like he kind of got off to that slow start, was injured a little bit, but he is fully back to being the guy that we've become used to seeing over these last couple of years. And like Gary had said, Orlando, I know they got the win against a shorthanded Hawks team last night, but that looked like a G League team out there. They're starting players that we're in like the top 1% of people who follow this stuff. I did not know who Hassani Gravett was. That guy's starting at point guard for the Orlando Magic. So they're on a back-to-back. It's a tough spot. Who knows what's going to happen in that game? I would not want to put any money down, on that spread or those money lines, but I think Brandon Ingram is going to be in for a huge night.
All right, Nick F., which forward are you looking at?
I love the Ingram call out of these guys, but I'm going to go with Karis LeVert at 7.7K going up against the Rockets. And he does run the risk of being chalky tonight because Malcolm Brogdon is questionable with that nagging Achilles injury that he's been dealing with. But even if Brogdon plays, and I know this isn't always popular, I still like LeVert in this one because Houston is one of the least efficient teams on the defensive end, and they're tied for 8th in pace right now. And I always like LeVert to cherry pick against bad teams. That's the biggest reason that I like him tonight. And Houston is also on the second leg of a back-to-back too. So a team that's struggling, been hurting with numbers. I know Wood was back last game. We don't know what we're going to see tonight from him. Either way, I think that this is an easy spot for him to go and at least bring you back value.
All right, which center has that building block potential, Nick W.?
Ton of options on the slate here. So you can go in probably 5, 6, 7 directions if you want to pay up. My favorite is probably Embiid. He's at 12,000 against that Hawks team that we just mentioned is pretty shorthanded, doesn't have Clint Capella. John Collins is kind of like their only regular guy that you can rely on. Bogdanovich still a little banged up, although he did play last night. This is the tough spot to ask, some combination of Gorgie Jang and Onyeka Okongwu on the second night of a back-to-back to contain Joel Embiid, who's coming off of that 73 DraftKings point game against Boston, his last time out. So I think he's going to be a popular option, and for good reason. If you want to save a little cash, I like DeAndre Ayton. If you want to go down to 8,300, gets a good matchup against OKC. Not a lot to like about any of the options at center for the Thunder. Ayton certainly does not have the 70 DraftKings point upside that a player like Embiid does, but he's just been so consistent this season, essentially 35 to 45 DraftKings points every single night. So if you kind of want to fade some of those top end centers, save a little money, maybe pay up at guard, pay up at forward, I think Ayton is the direction you should look.
All right, Nick F., which direction are you looking in?
Look, I know every night Nikola Jokic is playing, you got to look at him. And he does have a favorable matchup against the Hornets tonight. And second most DK fantasy points allowed to centers this season. And coming off an off game for him, what was it, 29 DK fantasy points last night? Obviously not a great game, but when we've seen him post, sub 20 points, he usually bounces back pretty strong. That said, I am with Nick W on this one. I still think Joel Embiid is the guy to go with tonight. Atlanta's allowed the 6th most fantasy points to opposing centers this season. And, again, they're running ragged. They're struggling from a numbers standpoint. You don't have Clint Capella. You just got to rely on John Collins and some other guys who I just don't expect to do anything on that end of the floor against Embiid. And all around, they're not a defensively efficient team. So Embiid, I think, he runs the risk of being chalky. Jokic might help you out on that end a little bit, but I think Embiid's a guy you got to have tonight.
All right, Gary, and which center has that building block potential?
Yeah, actually building off Embiid, I think one of my favorite miniature game stacks on this slate is putting Embiid at the center spot and then putting John Collins, who is power forward and center eligible, at power forward at $7,300. He just seems underpriced considering what his role is going to be tonight. We saw it in Wednesday's game, and who knows, maybe we hear something where, there could definitely just be another outbreak on the Hawks that seems to be picking up steam every single day. But Collins played 41 minutes last night, 28 points, 12 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. He really brought it in every single category, finished with over 50 DraftKings points. If he sees anything close to that type of role again, which he probably will because they're just running out of players, I think the situation where Embiid hits his ceiling, he's going to need a somewhat negative game script or neutral game script, I should say. And in that scenario, it's probably John Collins who's just pulling the Hawks with his point potential to a 6 or 7 point loss. So I think both these guys complement each other's ceilings pretty well.
Nick F., do you think you can build around some value on this slate?
Yeah, there is one guy who jumps out to me, and I know there's a lot of value to be had right now. I know the Magic % a ton of value going up against the Pelicans, and I know Cam Reddish had a big night last night, and people are going to want to go and back him up against the Sixers. But for me, Max Strus is the guy tonight that you got to go with at 5.2K going up against the Pistons. He's had 34.5 DK fantasy points or more in his last 3 games. One of those games was against the Pistons. And with so many guys out, Miami still needs him to step up. Detroit, not good against wings this season. And even if this turns into a blowout, I know right now the spread on DraftKings Sportsbook is at 10.5 in favor of the Heat. Again, Detroit won the last game, but even if this is a blowout, we just saw Strus go off for, 34.5 last game DK fantasy points against the Pacers, and that was a blowout win for the Heat. This is a guy who's in a position right now who needs to prove himself. I know he got opportunities before, but nothing like he's getting right now, so he needs to prove he can stay a firm part of that rotation moving forward, and tonight he's going to continue to do that against the Pistons.
Gary, and some value you could build around.
Yeah, I think you really do have to exploit that game, but I'm a little bit more inclined to find guys on the Pistons side, just with no Cade Cunningham, no Jeremy Grant. Frank Jackson is questionable in this game, so you're probably going to see a little Corey Joseph. I know Killian Hayes just seems like he's in the doghouse in Detroit right now, so I would lean towards 2 guys, one being Saban Lee, who just was kind of like the 2020 darling value play, tended to be. He's been playing a lot more minutes lately, averaging basically a DraftKings point per minute with Cade and with Grant off the court so far this season. So he's probably pretty much a lock to reach 5-6x value if he's just playing 25 to 30 minutes. And then Hamidou Diallo, who's played over 30 minutes the last 2 games, should only see his role increase with Cunningham now in health and safety protocols. So there's probably 4 Denver players below $4,500 that you could reasonably consider viable tonight.
All right, Nick W., what do you think?
Yeah, the fact that we're at this point now in the season where Hamidou Diallo has played 30 minutes in multiple games in a row can be said in the same sentence is kind of emblematic of where we're at. But I do like those calls in Detroit. There's going to be a lot of value there. I think with Jonas Valanciunas out tonight, Willie Hernan-Gomez becomes pretty viable for New Orleans. He's at 3,800. He's routinely been putting up 15 to 25 DraftKings points as a backup to Valanciunas off the bench. So I think he'll be in a really good spot with his minutes set to potentially double tonight, given their situation. I do like Onyeka Okongwu again at 3,100. I talked about him yesterday. He was on a minutes limit in that game against Orlando, but still got to 23 DraftKings points, had 3 blocks in 19 minutes. He's always really, really impressive in small spurts. So hopefully on the second night of a back-to-back, he gets a slightly extended workload, maybe plays a little more than Gorgie Jang. And then Jordan Nwora down at 5,000. I mean, 32, 39, 50, and 36 DraftKings points over his last 4 games, respectively. Should play a lot again tonight for Milwaukee. I think there's a chance that maybe Milwaukee holds Holiday or Chris Middleton out on the second half of a back-to-back. Maybe they're looking ahead to that Christmas Day game. If that's the case, then I think Nwora becomes my favorite value.
All right, Slate Approved pick time, fellas. So which bet is your favorite to build your bankroll? Garion, where are you going?
So I was trying to find a game that's like the least affected by COVID to maybe get like a relatively sensible read on it. I think that might be Knicks Wizards. The Knicks actually might have a couple guys back tonight in RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin. We'll see. They're out of the health and safety protocols. We know that sometimes it takes a game or two in terms of conditioning. But I like the over in this spot. Right now it's set at 211. The Wizards are kind of just like we've been seeing the Wizards be the last half decade, an over machine as of late. Their defense has been terrible, the 3rd worst defensive rating in basketball across the last 10 games. They have also hit the over in 8 of their last 12 games overall. I just look at the Wizards and yes, they're struggling offensively. Maybe that's the reason to not like the over in this game, but of all the teams on this slate, they're probably one of the 3 least affected by COVID right now. They pretty much have all their starters aside from KCP. So I just think this game isn't going to be pretty, but I think it squeaks over to 11.
Nick W., what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Gary kind of said it. There's so many games where you're looking at these spreads. You're like, the situations themselves are crazy now. Some of them are going to get even weirder by the time, the games tip off, 8 hours from now. But I'm going to go under 209 in the Hawks-Sixers game. The Hawks, they're a top 5 offense on the season, but without Trae Young, they have very few options. They don't really have anybody who can replicate anything close to what Trae Young brings to that offense. He's basically single-handedly carrying them to that top 5 ranking. They only scored 98 points on the Magic's D squad last night. It could be another big individual night for a guy like John Collins, but I don't think they're going to score, any more than that against this Sixers team that obviously, is mostly healthy and has some better defensive options, guys like Joel Embiid. So I think this is a night where the Hawks, maybe struggle to get to 90 points. So even if the Sixers, are easily over 100, I have a hard time believing this one pushes over that 209 total.
All right, Nick F., Slate Approved pick.
I like the Spurs money line tonight going up against the Lakers. It's at even money right now. The Lakers have not been hot at all. So not this whole season pretty much, but not hot at all since December 15th. That was that OT win versus Dallas without Luka. And in the course of that, since then, they've lost Anthony Davis. I know the Spurs aren't a great team on the road or really at home this season. They're 6-9 in both instances, and the Lakers are better at home. But with such a tiny spread, I don't mind looking at their records against the spread, and the Lakers are not great in these situations. The Spurs are much better too. So I'm taking the Spurs tonight to upset the Lakers.
All right. Thank you, guys. That is going to do it for NBA. It's all NFL the rest of the way here on The Sweat. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to your Christmas Eve edition of The Sweat. Say hello to our other NFL panel, DraftKings contributors Pierce Dietrich, Reed Fowler, and Jeff Ulrich. Guys, NFL Thursday night showdown time. Your best DFS and sportsbook plays for 49ers Titans. So who are you putting in the captain spot, Pierce?
It's going to be George Kittle. The rule is pretty similar to always. You either try to find a value guy that's going to really go off, or you play the best player. And on this slate, I don't think there's any question that George Kittle is the best player. Maybe you can make an argument for Deebo Samuel that he has just as much upside, but Kittle has a much higher floor. He's going to get much more volume, and with volume, you get more chances at touchdowns. I get being contrarian with Deebo Samuel, but they're basically the same price. I'll take the safety in Kittle and the upside as well.
All right, Reed, where are you going for your captain spot?
Yeah, I think you got to go with Kittle. I'm sure Jeff's going to give us a diatribe on how Deebo has much higher upside, but he's only caught one pass in the last 2 months. I know that's hyperbole for the wrong way, but it's George Kittle. Like, he's amazing. And even in a mediocre Sunday, he caught all 6 of his targets for 93 yards. He gets Jayon Brown, who gives up 88% completion percentage as a linebacker, and he's athletic. He's an athletic linebacker, and the Tennessee Titans play opposing tight ends well, but it's got to be Kittle. The upside is just too far and immense. And I think his rushing upside for Deebo Samuel kind of caps his upside because he's just not catching any balls.
All right, Jeff, what do we think? Are you putting in the captain spot? Are you going to make a case for Deebo Samuel here?
I mean, I just can't believe these guys are saying that George Kittle's the best player in this game when Ryan Tannehill is available on the other side of the ball. I do actually like Ryan Tannehill as a captain's play here, but it comes down to, it's not that I think Ryan Tannehill is the best player in this game. It just comes down to how I think this game is going to go. San Francisco has so many weapons. And yes, George Kittle could get 10 plus targets here again and go off. But, Deebo Samuel could run the ball in twice, get 5 targets, and Kittle could end up with 5 for 60. I think on the other side of the ball is where the offense is going to be concentrated. We know Ryan Tannehill takes those red zone rushes. He's probably going to have A.J. Brown back to work with against a very weak San Francisco secondary. I think Ryan Tannehill rebounds here a little bit, and I really do feel like this is a good spot for him to put up 20 plus points. And again, there's if the scoring gets spread on the other side, Tannehill could easily end up as the highest fantasy producer if he rushes one in or if he just has a better passing day. So I like going with him, and you also save a ton of money by putting him in your captain spot.
Well, speaking of saving a ton of money, what's your favorite value play for the Showdown contest, Reed?
It's Dontrell Hilliard. This is another Ulrich favorite. Another Tennessee running back that we're trying to bring back from yesteryear, but $2,800. He's the pass catching back for Tennessee, kind of going off of and dovetailing off of what Jeff was alluding to, how the game's going to go. If San Francisco's up in this game, then you got to figure that this guy who's got 9 attempts and 6 targets last week, especially if A.J. Brown is out, I think Dontrell Hilliard does present a lot of value. I'll leave the 3rd or 4th tight end for Pierce Dietrich to talk about.
All right, Jeff, where are you going for your value play?
I mean, same idea. I'm just going to go cheaper than Reed. I'm going to go with Jeremy McNichols. I mean, I definitely think that if you're playing the Tennessee side of this game, you can roster like both running backs. And then by both, I mean like Donta Foreman and one of McNichols or Hilliard. I mean, these guys are getting rotated in. Foreman is taking the bulk of the carry. So, I mean, like he definitely has the most solid upside. And if you are making Tennessee lineups here, I would suggest getting Foreman in, because if you're predicting Tennessee to win this game, or if you're creating your roster based on that formula, he's probably going to have a chance to like really push for 60% of the workload. But McNichols getting worked in the red zone as well. It's a good pass catching back, and he's cheap, right? So I think you'll see 2 of these running backs be very viable for Tennessee. And again, I obviously like the Tennessee side here. I think their offense is going to be a little bit better than people think. And Jeremy McNichols at 2,200, definitely a viable target here for daily fantasy right now.
All right, Pierce, what do we think?
I'm not going to save you a lot, actually. I'm going to go with Jeff Wilson, but make sure that Eli Mitchell is officially out. Last I checked, he was out of this game, but you never know with the NFL these days. So if Eli Mitchell is out, then Jeff Wilson got 21 carries, over 100 yards last week. I know he's a backup, and maybe you don't want to play him, but Eli Mitchell's a backup as well. He wasn't the starting running back at the beginning of the season. San Francisco makes running backs good. It's in their DNA. We saw Wilson run pretty well last week. If you're going to get 21 carries out of any running back today, then you have to roster that guy. If you're going to get 21 again out of Wilson, I think you have to put him on your roster.
All right, Jeff, let's move to the sportsbook side of things. What is your favorite player prop available for this one?
Yeah, so going back basically all the way to the start of Jimmy Garoppolo's career, He's never gone more than 2 games without an interception. And he's coming into this game, 2 games. He hasn't thrown an interception. You're just getting good odds here. You're getting plus 115 for Jimmy Garoppolo to throw an interception against a Tennessee defense who, again, they've really improved. Their pass rush has improved too. And when quarterbacks are under pressure, that tends to be when they make mistakes. They've got 13 interceptions on the year. So basically averaging right around 1 per game. I think Garoppolo at plus money here to throw an INT in this game is a very, very good prop to attack for tonight.
All right, Pierce, which prop are you looking at?
George Kittle over 68.5 yards receiving. This just seems a little too low to me. I know it's not the greatest matchup in the world, but what are you going to do? He's averaged 141 yards receiving over his last 3 games. This is about half of that. I think you can get there. If San Francisco is projected to score 24 points, that means they're going to move the ball. Who's going to move the ball? Well, it's more than likely going to be George Kittle. He's been 38% of their offense over the last 3 games. So if you do the math, let's say he's 30% of the offense and they get 226 total yards, which isn't a lot. That's over 69 yards. If they get 300 yards and he has 30%, which again is on the conservative end, that's 100 yards receiving. I think the 68.5 is just way too low for George Kittle.
Reed, what do we think?
Yeah, I didn't know the Pythagorean theorem was going to come out for Pierce and do all the arithmetic on the Christmas Eve, but here we are. I'm going Jimmy G over 3.5 rush yards, minus 110. I think it's a good number too. Like, he hasn't done this a lot. He's like 1 in 5 this year for doing it. But let's see, Mac Jones got 11 yards on Tennessee last time. And we saw Big Ben have a rushing touchdown, even though it was a sneak. So I think there is a viable option here at minus 110. Jimmy G, all he has to do is scramble. And we know Tennessee can put pressure on the quarterback. Jimmy G doesn't do it a lot, but over 3.5 rushing yards, I think he can get it done.
All right, guys, let's move to Slate Approved Pick Time. What is your favorite bet this evening, Pierce?
San Francisco -3. I'm going to continue to say that Tennessee are frauds. San Francisco's playing well, covered in 5 of the last 6 of their last 8. Tennessee will be without 2 of their starting linemen on the left side. They were already allowing a 23% pressure rate against Jacksonville. They allowed a 40% pressure rate last week. They allowed a 27% pressure rate to Pittsburgh. Tannehill has had a bad quarterback rating in both those games, under 200 yards passing in both those games. And on the other side, San Francisco's pass rush has been absolutely on fire over the last 3 games. They've had multiple players in each of those games getting over 4 pressures on the quarterback. It's going to be a long day for Tannehill, and San Francisco will be able to take this one easily.
All right, Reed, favorite bet tonight?
Kyle Juszczyk, over 8.5 receiving yards. This guy has gone over 40 receiving yards in 4 games. He's a Pro Bowl fullback. We know he gets operated in this offense, or utilized, in this offense. And with Eli Mitchell out, he seems to be that guy to back up Jeff Wilson. And I know Hasty is healthy, and Juszczyk has gotten work when Hasty has been out, but he's hit his over receiving prop six times out of 10 this year. And two of his last 3, he said is over. So 8.5 just seems wildly low for a guy who's operating as one of the main pass catchers for Jimmy G.
All right, Jeff, favorite bet tonight?
Oh, I'm delivering some coal to the Dietrich family this holiday season. Tennessee Titans plus 140 money line. Titans since 2019, 11-5 after a loss. Straight up, their defense is underrated. And look, if you want a little bit of a long shot bet here, go to the player parlays on the DraftKings Sportsbook. Donta Foreman, 100+ rush yards and a touchdown, plus 1,300. Man, those are good odds. He went over 100 yards last week. He's running the ball really well.
All right, good stuff, guys. One more break, one more block to go. The Sweat will return. Welcome back to the Sweat. We made it to the final block of the show. Say hello to DraftKings contributors Reed Fowler, Jeff Ulrich, and Matt Meiselman. Guys, we are talking NFL Saturday night, favorite DFS and sportsbook plays for Christmas NFL games. And it's a Christmas miracle. We got a Millie Maker on Saturday, $25 to enter. 2-game classic with the Browns, Packers, Colts, Cardinals game. So who are you paying up for in this 2-game classic slate, Reed?
It's got to be Jonathan Taylor, right? $8,300, 23 carries inside the 5-yard line. The next closest person, guys, is Jalen Hurts at 14 and James Conner at that same number. This guy, outside of what he does inside the 20s or outside the 20s, it is amazing. But inside where those scoring numbers and where those value touches are so important, he is a guy that far and away exceeds every other player on this slate. And he's just top 5 in yards after contact. I don't think there's enough to be said about Jonathan Taylor. If you're not going, you've got to go a little contrarian. I also like Zach Ertz. He's the most expensive tight end, but he's someone who's seen 18 targets in the last 2 games.
All right, Jeff, who are you paying up for?
Yeah, paying up for, I'm going to go with Kyler Murray here. And like maybe the passing efficiency hasn't been great, but I really feel like for the Arizona Cardinals to keep this game close, Kyler Murray is going to have to run the ball. And you kind of look at it like the last few games that Kyler Murray has been back. Obviously, no DeAndre Hopkins. What has he had to do? He's gone over 50 yards rushing. Like his 2 season best rushing yards totals games have come in 2 of those last 3 games. Now, the Detroit game we can write off a little bit because that was just weird. It felt like they kind of gave up after halftime. But the games before that, you saw he doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins to work with. He's taking off a little bit more. And I think he's going to have to do that a lot against the Colts. I expect the Cardinals to be down in this game. I don't think they're going to win, but I do think Kyler Murray is going to put up some stats. And I think you absolutely will need him in your DFS lineups for this 2-game slate.
All right, Matt, who are you paying up for?
So in terms of lineup construction, I do think it'll be pretty easy to kind of just pay up everywhere, which means that all of the expensive players are going to be pretty popular. So I do think you kind of just have to pick and choose here and go with 1 or maybe 2 of them, because otherwise you're kind of just making the same lineup everyone else is. To me, Jonathan Taylor is the guy who should be the priority over everyone else. If Murray is the most popular quarterback and Adams is the most popular receiver, I think Taylor is the most deserving of being the guy who everyone plays at running back. I just think like his floor is so much higher than everybody else. His ceiling is so much higher than everybody else. I'm not sure if the game script sets up perfectly, but I almost don't think it matters. Like he's so involved no matter what's going on in the game. I think there are more ways for Devontae Adams or Kyler Murray to fail than there are for Taylor. So Taylor's the guy I'm paying up for. I think you can pay up for others too, but he's the priority. I think he's just the best overall fantasy play right now.
All right, Jeff, who's the best value play for the 2-game classic slate?
Yeah, I mean, Matt kind of alluded to this, but like there's just value kind of everywhere. Like I don't think you're going to have problems identifying like cheap players to go to here. I mean, I think Zach Ertz is kind of a must in this spot just for the simple fact that I know he's the most expensive tight end, but he's also under 5K. And I think he's a must just for the fact that Arizona is I think has a very good shot of being behind in this game. And the Colts are a very big funnel to the pass defense, specifically through the middle, where they just don't cover tight ends. They've allowed the bottom 3 in terms of receptions allowed to the tight end position. So when you're looking at tight end, there's some really cheap guys like Degura from Green Bay, Jack Doyle even on the other side. But I think you absolutely just need to pay down for Zach Ertz. And again, at under 5K, like you could go double tight end if you really want to, but he to me is like the best pure value on the board. I think if you want to go really cheap, you can go with like the Green Bay receiver, like an Alan Lazard as well to get a little bit contrarian, but every other value play on the board just to me reeks of kind of like very, very boomer bust. Whereas Ertz at under 5K is like a very, very pure value that I think has a great floor here.
All right, Matt, best value play.
So I think the most underpriced player is actually Jonathan Taylor. He's 8,300 and I think he deserves to be well over 9K, but to give an actual value play, I think, like Jeff said, Michael Pittman and Alan Lazard specifically, who we mentioned, those guys, like they're not expensive enough to. And I think there are a bunch of Cardinals guys because DeAndre Hopkins is out that like these guys are all underpriced. So I'll go a little off the board and give one that I think will be pretty contrarian. And that's Antoine Wesley, who most people may not have heard of on the Cardinals. Rondale Moore actually got hurt during last week's game against the Lions. My guess is he'll play, but he didn't play much wide receiver. He may not have even gotten a single wide receiver snap in the second half. Wesley was the guy playing the slot with AJ Green and Christian Kirk out there. So if that trend continues, he's only a $3,000 receiver. And if it is true that the Cardinals are behind in this game and need to pass more, you'll see more of these 3 receiver sets. So I think there are a ton of value plays that are worth looking at, but Wesley could be one who's way down there at 3K that people just kind of overlook.
All right, Reed, hit me with some value.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff does his Jeff thing where he mentions every single player on the slate. So the element of surprise is sort of out there. But yeah, Alan Lazard, and Matt did it as well. Alan Lazard is one of those guys, right, because of the injuries. But I'm surprised that Jeff didn't mention his boy, Chase Edmonds. Like, he mentions Chase Edmonds on every single show when it's a main slate. And this time he just didn't, right? And I get it, right? He's coming back from injury. He's kind of getting worked into it. Kyler Murray is doing a little bit more. The one thing that scares me, though, about Chase Edmonds, even though he's underpriced, in my opinion, is that the Colts don't bring a lot of pressure. They don't bring a lot of pressure. They don't bring a lot of blitzes either. So I do think that opens up the lanes for a guy like Zach Ertz. And Kyler's not necessarily going to have to run that much, right? And they don't play a lot of man. So I do think this is going to be a passing attack from Arizona. But if I'm going to do that, and there's a guy that's under 5K that I really like, it's Chase Edmonds.
All right, moving over to the Sportsbook. Do you see Green Bay covering the 7.5 points with the Browns on a short week, Matt?
I don't really think so, but there's also a lot of uncertainty with the Browns. Like, they just had this game only a couple of days ago where they were missing half their team basically for COVID protocols. And maybe these guys can correct me here. I don't think it's totally clear who's back for Cleveland. If Cleveland's fully healthy and they get everyone back for this game, I actually think this line is way too high. So it's just kind of worth waiting to see what happens here, who's going to be active for the Browns, if Baker Mayfield's there and he has his whole supporting cast, all the normal guys that he normally has. But if the Browns are fully healthy and the Packers are fully healthy, I think that this line should be less than a touchdown. It's just hard to really say right now because we have so much ambiguity with who's going to be on the field.
Reed, what do we think?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm in the same camp as Matt with the uncertainty on the Cleveland side. But if we take that out and looking at just what Green Bay has done over the year, you would think, yeah, against just essentially a decimated team in Cleveland by COVID and injuries of the sort, you just think that, man, this is a team where Green Bay is absolutely rolling. Coach of the year, probably Matt LaFleur, MVP back-to-back candidate, and Aaron Rodgers going against a Cleveland team. Having said that, I much rather want the Packers in a teaser leg, get them down to 1.5 because it's at the 7.5 now, or where it lands, just to win. Because we saw last week with the Packers that when they get up by a lot, they play that prevent defense and they allow a team like a backup quarterback, in the Ravens to come and essentially almost win that game in the 2-point conversion. This is a different team. This is a different week. Having said that, I don't really trust the Packers at this point to do it. And if they get up by a lot, they're probably just going to run the ball a ton, and Cleveland is going to triple team Devontae Adams. So I'm a little bit worried about covering 7.5.
Jeff, are you worried about covering 7.5?
Yeah, I think things are trending like well enough for Cleveland that I'm actually pretty interested in Cleveland at plus 7.5 here. The Packers, obviously, Marquez Valdes-Scantling now on COVID protocol as well. I don't think that's like a huge concern or anything. And I still think the Packers are the better team here, but I'm expecting a close game. This is pretty much the season for Cleveland. The one thing that has me just a little bit trepidatious is that even a word, trepid? I don't know. Is that Myles Garrett is banged up, right? Yeah. So if we had like positive news on Myles Garrett before, and I think it's actually almost worth waiting on Garrett before you make a bet here. I would actually be really in on Cleveland at plus 7. I think this is a good team. And I just feel like, they're getting underrated here because of what has been happening through their team. But as we've seen with these COVID things too, like once it goes through the team, it's gone. And then the team kind of gets back to full strength, and it's almost like a buy low opportunity. So I think you're definitely buying low on Cleveland here at plus 7.5. If this got under a touchdown, I probably wouldn't be as interested, but at over 7 points, man, that's a very vital number. Once we get over 7, I think Cleveland at plus 7.5 is probably going to end up being a bet. You just want to keep an eye on what's going on with Myles Garrett.
All right, guys, real quick, under 2 minutes, just a 1-point spread for the Colts Cardinals. Who do you like in the Indy Arizona game, Reed?
You got to go with the Colts. Even though you're buying them at a high and you're buying essentially Arizona on a low, I think the Colts are just the better team right now, and they can attack the deficiencies against Arizona and their run D. So give me the Colts.
Jeff.
Colts, I mean, it's probably going to be chalky, but like money line plus 100. I just don't know how Arizona is going to stop Jonathan Taylor. They don't have a good rush defense. Their offense has been super inefficient. Kyler is regressing, and it's probably because no DeAndre Hopkins as well. So I think Arizona could keep this close, but I really like the Colts on the money line.
Matt.
Yeah, as someone who picked the Colts to beat the Titans has been saying the Titans aren't as good all year. I'm still mad at Carson Wentz for giving away that game in overtime the last time they faced each other. But Yeah, the Colts are the better team. I'm not sure if I want to pick them here with this line. It's already come down close to pick them. My gut feeling is actually Arizona wins, even though the Colts are better. So I kind of think home field advantage wins out here and Arizona takes it.
All right, good stuff, guys. Thank you. That is the show. Stay tuned for the Madden Sim, starting with the Giants and Titans at noon, and then check out the slate at 5 p.m. with Adam Kaufman and Reed Fowler talking some more NFL.
Wow, poor Reed.